that China is stronger than any of the would-be peer competitors that the United States has ever faced before. It's stronger as an economic power, in particular, and I do take an old-fashioned view that economic weight is the foundation of national power. That is not to say that America isn't strong too. It's a very strong country, but China is stronger relative to the United States than any country has ever been since the United States first poked its nose out of the Western Hemisphere at the end of the 19th century. Its economy is far, far bigger, probably already now twice as big as the Soviet Union's was relative to America's at the height of the Cold War, and is likely to grow much bigger still. We would make a real mistake to keep on underestimating China's power for the next few years, as we have done so consistently for the last 25 years. We face this predicament today because we've underestimated China's power for so long. And I might say we've overestimated the United States. For too long, we've taken it for granted that the United States is by definition the world's strongest state. By definition has military power to do whatever it likes. What we've discovered repeatedly, but still don't seem to have learnt from, is that the United States, for all its strength and power and creativity and all the good things about it, is not the power we thought it was and the power we hoped it would be. And what that means is that the cost to the United States of preserving its leadership in Asia in the face of China's power and ambition to overtake it is going to be very high. It will be comparable to, and perhaps higher than, the costs of preserving its position vis-à-vis the Soviet Union during the Cold War, because China is stronger. Now, the other side of the coin is that the imperatives to the United States are lower than they were in previous enterprises when it confronted peer competitors. And that's because in the past, when the United States has set out to defeat, for example, Wilhelmine Germany in 1917, or the Nazis and the Japanese in 1941, or the Soviets in 1948 and onwards, they confronted in each of those episodes powers which had a real prospect of dominating the whole of the Eurasian landmass. And any country that dominates the whole of the Eurasian landmass is easily going to be strong enough to threaten the United States at home in the Western Hemisphere. That provided a very deep foundational reason why the United States should be prepared to bear the burdens and pay the cost of confronting those very powerful states. But I think it's hard to argue that China has a prospect of doing that, because although I am pretty bullish about China, I think the chances of China having the kind of preponderance that would allow it to dominate the other countries in Eurasia are very low. Therefore, the chance of it being able to dominate Eurasia and threaten the United States at home in the Western Hemisphere are very low, and therefore the chance of the United States having the will, the motive, the purpose to pay those higher costs and risks in order to confront China in East Asia, to prevent China becoming the primary power in East Asia, is pretty low. Because I just don't see why the United States should commit itself to those costs and risks. And moreover, there's no real sign that they are. There are people in Washington, including the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defence, who talk of a new Cold War or language like it. But I think they still underestimate China. I don't hear from them a clear understanding of how big that will be, a clear articulation of a strategy that would deliver America a reasonable prospect of success in confronting China. No clear recognitions of how much that will cost, and no clear statement of why the United States has to commit itself to paying those costs. And I haven't even mentioned Donald Trump. But Trump is an important part of this, not just because of his own policies, but because of what his election tells us about the attitude not of the foreign policy elites in Washington, D.C., but of American voters. Because in the end, a national effort on the scale and cost and risk required to confront a country as powerful as China in its own hemisphere is not something that can be decided by a few people in think tanks up and down Massachusetts Avenue. It needs to be decided by the American people as a whole. And what you see from the election of Donald Trump, what you see from the willingness of the Republican establishment to go along with him, and what you see on the Democrat side of politics as the Democrats try to redefine themselves in a Trump era, is very little commitment, if any, to preserving the US leadership role upon which this whole model of American engagement in Asia depends. In the light of all this, Australians have to ask themselves, how confident can we be that America today and in the decades to come will commit to the costs and risks of containing China? And what if I'm wrong? How sure can we be that they will succeed if I'm wrong and they do decide to commit? Because if I'm wrong, if America really is committed, then what we'll see is escalating strategic rivalry, further steps up the trend, the very sharply rising trend that we've seen in the last few months and years. Now, everyone in Washington and everyone in Australia, I guess, would hope that in the face of that, China would simply back off. But I think that underestimates China again. The balance of resolve favours China, for the simple geographical reason that the contest we're talking about is one in East Asia. If the contest was in the Western Hemisphere, I wouldn't give China a chance. But in China's backyard, where the balance of resolve is so strongly shaped by geography, I think the chances of China backing off before America does are very low. That means if America sticks to the commitment, the chance of war goes up. It's quite high in this scenario. Over an issue like Taiwan, in a sense, it doesn't really matter what the issue that starts it is. What's important is that the US and China will find themselves fighting a conflict whose essential driver is the question as to which of them is the primary power in Asia, a very old-fashioned conception of a hegemonic war. If that happens, America will not win easily. In fact, I think the chances are America will not win at all. It won't lose. In a sense, the PLA is not going to march down the Constitution Avenue in the United States, but it will not win. And in failing to win, in failing to resolve, the old order in Asia will be destroyed anyway. Moreover, the chance of that conflict escalating to a nuclear conflict is quite high, and the chance of that becoming a full-scale nuclear exchange is quite high. So if I'm wrong, if America is committed, that leads Asia and Australia directly to what looks to me like a very serious catastrophe. In neither case, whether America's committed or it isn't, are Australia's security interests served by supporting and encouraging current US policy. So will we anyway? I've just explained what we should do. What will we do? I don't know, actually. It's very easy for us to keep trying to slide along as we're doing at the moment without making a choice on this, being actually systemically duplicitous, telling the United States that we are supporting them and telling the Chinese that we're not. That is Australia's policy today. I think whether we can resolve that, whether we can come out and actually say, no, we're not going to go down this path the United States is talking about following, is going to be hard. It's very easy to slide into supporting the United States through timidity and a lack of imagination. It's easy to say, we have no choice, as people keep on saying. That's simply wrong. We do have a choice. We do have a choice. We haven't yet made that choice yet. But what is notable to me is that Australian government so far, including the present government, have so far failed to endorse the American designation of China as a strategic rival. They haven't done so yet, not I think because of a kind of strategic argument I've just unfolded, but for the simpler reason, going back to Mr. Pompeo, of fear of China's anger and what it would mean for our trade relationships. But I think what that shows is they're still hoping to muddle through. And I think this is true of both sides of politics. And that does remind me of the 1930s, because if you look at what Australia did as things darkened in the late 1930s, Australian political leaders recognised that the Singapore strategy, the continuing dependence on the United Kingdom to which we were so heavily committed, was not working. But we simply couldn't imagine doing anything else. And so we slid into the fall of Singapore and the biggest catastrophe in our national history. So what should we do? Well, two possibilities. One is that we should go back to the United States and say, we don't think the policy you're working on at the moment is going to work. But we can encourage them to develop one that will. And it is possible to imagine a US policy which recognised China's growing power, which was sustainable at a level of effort the United States is prepared to commit. It would be a very different US role in Asia than one we've seen in the past, but it would be much better for us than the United States withdrawing, which seems to be the most likely alternative. I think there was a time, around about 2012, when Australia could have done that, could have gone out there and argued for that different model. And if you look at, for example, at what Lee Hsien Loong was talking about in his big speech in Singapore on the 1st of June this year, that was the kind of thing he was talking about. And we could do that, and maybe we should. But I'm here to tell you, I think the time has passed. I think the chances of that succeeding is now very low. So what should we do instead? Prepare for how best we can manage our security if that fails, which means prepare to stand alone. Thank you.